Welcome to Lessons in History. The LO today is, why were there so many plots against Elizabeth? We are focusing in this video on the Catholic threat to Elizabeth. There are 3 plots that you need to know, all of which champion the idea of getting Mary Queen of Scots on the throne. We will look at the Ridolfi, Throckmorton, and we'll finish with one of the most significant events in all of British history, the Babington Plot. A summary of all of these plots are available on the Lessons in History Instagram page, along with others, so be sure to follow along for your daily dose. As always, timestamps are in the video for the plot that you find most tricky. Mary Queen of Scots is not Bloody Mary or Mary I. That was Elizabeth's half-sister. Mary Queen of Scots is not Mary of Guise. That was her mum. Mary Queen of Scots is not the Virgin Mary. That was Jesus' mum. Mary Queen of Scots was the granddaughter of one of Henry VIII's sisters, Margaret Tudor. Margaret had a son named James V, who was the King of Scotland, and went on to marry a French princess called Mary of Guise. This meant that when their child was born, known as Mary Stuart, in 1542, would become Queen of Scotland, and she did so at age just 6 days old. Mary moved to France, however, due to the conflicts which were ongoing in Scotland at the time. Her mother, Mary of Guise, ruled Scotland as a regent in her absence. As France is a Catholic country, and her mother, Mary of Guise, who was French, Mary was brought up as a Catholic. During her time in France, she married the heir to the French throne, Francis II, and was briefly Queen of France for 18 months, but her husband died. She was left with only the Scottish throne. As a result, she returned to Scotland in 1561, but at this time, Scotland was going through its own Protestant Reformation. This was quite unfortunate, putting Catholic Mary at odds with her own people. Although she was queen, Mary was very much a foreigner in her own land. Mary was Elizabeth's cousin, and as we've looked at in challenges facing Elizabeth, one of these challenges was legitimacy, as a result of her father's divorce to Catherine of Aragon. Some thought that Mary Queen of Scots was the rightful heir to the throne. Therefore, ensure that you have this in the forefront of your minds when thinking about plots against Elizabeth. Issues not only of religion, but also of legitimacy come to the front. When you throw fellow Catholic Philip II, the ruler of Spain, who was literally sick to death of pirates like John Hawkins and Francis Drake plundering Spanish ships, Catholics in Europe began a secret war to depose or replace Elizabeth with the rightful heir, Mary, Queen of Scots. As you do, Mary Queen of Scots chose her cousin Henry Stuart to be her second husband. Henry Stuart, or Lord Darnley, was related to Mary Queen of Scots through a maternal grandma, Margaret Tudor. This marriage between Mary and Henry was brief and unhappy, but it did produce a son called James. Darnley, in suspicious circumstances, was murdered after less than 2 years together with Mary. Rumours were rife that Mary had had a hand in the crime, and when Mary married her third husband, yes 3, Earl of Bothwell, it is believed that he had arranged the murder. Civil war broke out in Scotland, with Mary being forced to abdicate or step down as queen in favour of her son, James VI of Scotland. In fear for her life, Mary flees and arrives in Cumberland, England in 1568. Just think of where Newcastle is, and then go west until you hit the coast. Knowing that Mary was a threat, Elizabeth kept her in a state of house arrest until her eventual execution. Mary was kept in isolation far from London or the coast, with the hope that it would limit any threat Mary might pose. With over 14 attempts on her life during her reign, it was important that Elizabeth had a key individual by her side. That individual was William Cecil, someone who could uncover plots, support Elizabeth in Parliament as we have seen in my other video, link on the screen, and ultimately keep her on the throne. The Pope's financier, Roberto Ridolfi, was a Catholic Italian banker who lived in London. This plot was again an attempt to restore Catholicism in England. It involved Mary Queen of Scots, the Pope, King Philip II of Spain, and the Duke of Norfolk. Elizabeth had been excommunicated or kicked out of the church by the Pope in 1570. That is to say, there were 9 popes in total during Elizabeth's reign. As a result of this excommunication, English Catholics, and in fact Catholics around Europe, were now free to rebel as, in the eyes of God, it was okay to go against the Queen. The plan was simple, for Elizabeth to be assassinated and to be replaced by Mary Queen of Scots as the monarch. The idea was for around 6,000 troops to land in Essex, led by the Duke of Alba. Their arrival, it was hoped, would prompt a rebellion. Ridolfi optimistically calculated that about half of the English nobles were Catholic, and that when they rebelled, they would be able to assemble nearly 40,000 men. Once Elizabeth had been murdered, the plan was for Mary to marry the Duke of Norfolk. Mary still being in prison, or isolation, she was desperate for her freedom, and had lost all hope that Elizabeth would actually help her either return to France or Scotland. Elizabeth's intelligence network discovered the conspiracy. A man named Charles Bailey was arrested and sent to the Tower of London. Cecil placed an informant in his cell, and discovered that letters were being passed from the Spanish government to individuals in England. Alarm bells went off for Cecil. A large military power being involved? Spain? Catholicism? Scary times. He had to get to the bottom of it. In these coded letters was a mysterious individual named 40. His informants around the country revealed that this 40 was the Duke of Norfolk, the richest man in England, and a blood relative to Elizabeth. This was serious. Spain, the Pope, and an aristocrat. Cecil presented the information to Elizabeth, who was reluctant to sign the death warrant of Norfolk, but after Cecil circulated news of this plot in his own run newspaper, the public turned against the Duke, calling for his head. In 1572, Elizabeth signed Norfolk's death warrant, and he is beheaded for treason. Cecil, however, could not pinpoint the connection to Mary Queen of Scots, but he sensed more plots would follow. To help, Cecil recruited the hotshot Francis Walsingham, and he was appointed to the Privy Council in 1573 as Principal Secretary or Secretary of State. Walsingham, a committed Protestant, knew of the dangers of Catholicism, having witnessed the killing of 3,000 Protestants when he was England's ambassador to France at the St. Bartholomew Day massacre on the streets of Paris in 1572. This left a lasting impression and a drive to crush any Catholic threat against Elizabeth. Cecil was able to use this to his advantage and Elizabeth's security. Walsingham and his spy network were instrumental in uncovering the Throckmorton Plot. The plan of 1583 was to get Henry, Duke of Guise, Mary's French cousin, to invade England. He would be sponsored by King Philip II of Spain, and of course again, money from the Pope. Just leave her alone please, King Philip. To invade England, and again, Mary Queen of Scots was at the centre of this scheme. Mary was to be freed from house arrest, and there was to be an uprising by the Catholic population. Elizabeth would be captured, and following her murder, Mary was to be installed as queen. It's almost identical to the previous plot, I hear you all say at once. Well, there were certainly similarities, but here are the subtle differences. Francis Throckmorton, after whom the plot is named, acted as an intermediary between Mary and the Spanish ambassador, de Mendoza. Before the plan could be put into action, Walsingham discovered what was happening. Throckmorton was placed under surveillance for 6 months. Once arrested, he was tortured on the rack and made a confession. Following this plot, the bond of association was established, which meant that anybody associated with an assassination plot against Elizabeth would not be allowed to benefit from the Queen's death in any way. Throckmorton himself was convicted of high treason and executed in July 1584. De Mendoza was expelled from England, and no more Spanish ambassadors lived in England for the rest of Elizabeth's reign. Once again, a lack of evidence meant that Mary escaped relatively unscathed. However, Walsingham and Cecil now became determined to find some hard evidence of Mary's treasonous activities so that she could be dealt with once and for all. It was difficult enough to get Elizabeth to execute the Duke of Norfolk in the Ridolfi Plot. To get her to execute Mary, now that would take some real cleverness on behalf of Cecil. Mary was isolated in Chartley Manor, Staffordshire, about 40 miles north of Birmingham, with the intent of cutting her off from the outside world. Here, a close eye could be kept on her. You could even say that it was a psychological tactic by Cecil to push Mary to make a move so that she could be caught red-handed, and this is exactly what happened in the Babington Plot. Mary made contact with the Catholic underground with her smuggled letters and came into contact with a man named Anthony Babington. The letters were written using a substitution code, with key terms being replaced by a symbol. Unfortunately for Mary, the person smuggling her letters was a double agent. He worked for Cecil and Walsingham. Now intercepted, these letters were deciphered by Thomas Philippes. The letters told of a plot to kill Elizabeth, free Mary, put her on the throne, echo, 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 and re-established Catholicism as England's religion. If this wasn't enough, guess who was involved? The Spanish. Yes, a Spanish invasion force would also be sent. Babington, a young Catholic and nobleman, sent messages to Mary describing his loyalty to her, and she replied saying that he was a friend. Ooh, friend, Catholic friend. Remember, in the eyes of God, as a result of the Pope's excommunication of Elizabeth, Catholics are doing no wrong by usurping or plotting to get rid of her. Babington tells Mary he has 100 men that are planning to break her free and has 6 men waiting in London to kill Elizabeth on her orders. Remember, Cecil's real target is Mary, not Babington. Mary sits on the letter. She waits, she thinks, for 10 days. Should she agree to this treasonous act? Cecil and Walsingham must be beside themselves, waiting for the trap to be sprung. On the 17th of July 1586, she replies with, "Set the 6 men to work." Cecil's trap is finally sprung. Mary has been caught in the act of treason. One historian labels her action as the last roll of the dice as a desperate, isolated woman who had lost everything. The following month, Babington was arrested, and in September 1586, he and his 6 other conspirators were hanged, cut down while still alive and quartered. To be clear, what did this actually mean? Well, it meant that you would be hanged, I think you know what that means, and then you would be cut down, still alive, gasping for air. Someone would take a knife, a cleaver perhaps, a dirty one, a rusty one, and cut you open, and then your internal organs would be removed. One does not simply plot against Queen Elizabeth. Walsingham now had proof of Mary's guilt. In October, Mary was placed on trial. Cecil conducts the prosecution himself, and Mary is found guilty of treason. Both Parliament and the Privy Council insist that Mary should be executed, but this needs Elizabeth's authority to carry out the deed. After all, Mary Queen of Scots was a queen, and it was tough for Elizabeth to sign this death warrant. Think back to our previous work. The monarch is there because of divine right. Only God can take away this position, not man. On February the 1st, 1587, Elizabeth signs and gives the death warrant to her Secretary of State, Davison, but tells him not to use it. Davison, backed by his Privy Council members, implements the death warrant anyway. Elizabeth knew what was going on, but pretended that she did not. On the 8th of February 1557, Mary Queen of Scots was executed, wearing a scarlet dress, the colour of Catholic martyrdom, dying for a cause. The executioner, probably a little nervous at killing a queen, missed her neck, hitting the head, then had to hack it off at the neck like a stubborn chicken wing at Nando's. The final insult, however, was to come when he lifted up the severed head. A few seconds later, it fell to the floor. Mary was wearing a wig. Thanks for making it to the end. I've put some practice questions up should you wish to give these a go. Leave any questions you have in the comments if you are unsure of the content or what you would like to see next. Don't forget to get your daily lesson in history on Instagram and follow along. Remember, these videos are here for your benefit, so if you liked the video, you know what to do, and if you didn't, then please tell me how I may make them better. Why do you think there were so many plots against Elizabeth? And why do you think none of them were successful? I'd be curious to hear what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching Lessons in History, and I'll see you in the next video.